Hedy Lamarr was dazzlingly beautiful, notoriously daring, sometimes misunderstood, and somehow managed to juggle 6 marriages, a scandalous private life, and an obsession with invention that led to the technology behind Wi-Fi. The incredible thing? For decades, she was billed as the most beautiful woman in the world. Moviegoers saw her as the ultimate Hollywood bombshell, someone whose face could stop traffic. But behind that face was a mind racing on a completely different frequency, one that saw her tinker, question, and experiment until she co-created one of the most impactful scientific breakthroughs of the 20th century. Yes, the same actress once embroiled in censorship battles because of a risque film also pioneered the technology that eventually shaped modern wireless communication. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. Because for all of Hedy Lamarr's glamorous roles and star power, her personal life was a labyrinth of shocking decisions, heartbreak, and reinventions. She started life under a very different name. Born in Vienna in 1914, Hedy Lamarr was originally Hedwig Eva Marie Kiesler, the only daughter in an upper-class family. Her parents had Jewish heritage, but they raised her in the Christian faith, thinking perhaps that path would help her navigate a rapidly changing, sometimes hostile, Europe. Even as a little girl, Hedwig, or Hedy, knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted to be in movies. She wanted to be on the big screen. There was nothing else that fired her imagination the way film did. Books bored her. Etiquette lessons irritated her. She would have traded a month's worth of Swiss boarding school for a single afternoon near a movie camera. And she found ways, bold, brazen ways, to make that dream happen. While other teenage girls in the 1920s might have been content to study for exams or attend Sunday family teas, Hedy was forging permission slips so she could waltz into film studios and try to talk her way into any role she could land. She staked out producers. She accepted invitations to flashy parties where the biggest names in the European film scene might spot her. She was cunning. She was absolutely determined. Before she turned 18, she left Vienna for Berlin, convinced that in a bigger hub of filmmaking, she could make the right connections. Her family tried sending her to boarding schools to keep her safe, to keep her from running wild. She'd always find a way to run home or run away again, chasing that dream. At 18, Hedy snagged her first major film role in a little project called Ecstasy. The title alone might ring alarm bells for a scandal in the early 1930s. And that's pretty much what happened. In fact, Ecstasy became so controversial that it faced bans in multiple countries. For the era, it was shockingly explicit. It featured a scene of Hedy running around in the nude, plus another infamous moment depicting a female orgasm. Audiences in the 1930s couldn't believe it. Sure, it was hardly pornographic by modern standards, but at the time, it caused an uproar. Rumors swirled that Hedy had been just 17 during filming. Though the truth is, she was already 18, the scandal only grew. A lot of people simply refused to see the artistry in it. All they saw was a compromised young woman on screen, and many tried to dismiss her as someone with questionable morals instead of a legitimate actress. The weirdest part of all? Her parents actually went to a screening. Hedy tried to wave off the explicit content as artistic. But once Mom and Dad witnessed that skinny-dipping sequence and the orgasm scene in a dark movie theater, they stormed out. She imagined it might end her career before it started. Instead, it lit a fuse that changed the trajectory of her entire life. People couldn't stop talking about this mesmerizing newcomer who'd thrown caution to the wind in front of the camera. But it also caught the attention of a man named Fritz Mandl, a powerful arms manufacturer from a wealthy family. Mandl was older, cunning, and had a reputation for being dangerously jealous. He'd set his eyes on Hedy from afar. After she made a bit of a splash in Vienna with a stage role, playing Empress Elizabeth, Mandl started courting her, ignoring every single one of her rejections. She was only 18. He was older, freshly divorced, and about as fascist-leaning as they came. Hedy claimed she wasn't interested, but then, perhaps under the spell of his power and sophistication, she found herself grudgingly drawn to him. She later admitted she was dazzled by his confidence, wealth, and the sense that he could protect her. In the spring of 1933, they got married, and she convinced herself that a perfect fairy tale awaited her. Instead, she found herself living in a golden prison, as she called it. Mandl demanded she quit acting entirely. He had connections all over Europe, especially in arms manufacturing circles. He used that power to try and buy up and destroy every copy of Ecstasy that he could get his hands on, furious that his wife's naked figure existed on film for the world to see. And that was only the start. He had her calls monitored, her free time micromanaged, her ability to go anywhere stifled. To mention pictures or acting within earshot of him was enough to incite a monstrous rage. Hedy tried twice to flee that oppressive life, but Mandl's wealth and private security managed to thwart both attempts. Then came a heartbreaking twist. Hedy's father, whom she adored, died suddenly of a heart attack. She was devastated so much that she spent a whole year in mourning. She wore black, refused to look at herself in mirrors, avoided bright colors, and became a shell of the vibrant girl who'd once escaped a Swiss boarding school in search of stardom. Her father's death also served as a startling reminder of how fleeting life could be. She decided she couldn't remain trapped forever. Summoning her nerve, Hedy made meticulous plans to get out. Different accounts exist of exactly how she escaped. In one telling, she studied the mannerisms of a maid who was about her height and drugged her so she could slip out disguised in the maid's uniform. In another version, she merely pulled together as many valuables as she could, particularly her expensive furs and jewelry, stuffed them into suitcases, waited for a moment when Mandl's vigilance slipped, and ran. She hopped on a train, bound for Paris, got the divorce papers processed, and never looked back. Regardless of the precise details, the one constant is that Mandl lost control of his golden bird, and Hedy, after a short stop in London, set her sights on Hollywood. It was in London that she met Louis B. Mayer, the powerhouse behind Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. He was a star maker credited with discovering luminaries like Greta Garbo. He had seen Ecstasy and was less than impressed with Hedy's scandalous reputation. So he offered her a contract of $125 a week, presumably thinking she was desperate enough to take crumbs. But Hedy had learned never to settle. She used her cunning again by purchasing a ticket on the same ocean liner, the Normandy, that Mayer and his wife were taking to return to the States. Trapped on the ship with her for days, Mayer got to see a different side of her, charming, clever, well-spoken. By the time they docked in New York, he was offering her $500 a week. Not only did she accept that new deal, but she also adopted a new name, Hedy Lamarr, chosen in part by Mayer's wife Margaret in tribute to Barbara Lamarr, a silent film star who had died heartbreakingly young. Eerie, yes, but it made for a punchy stage name that helped bury Hedwig Kiesler's ecstasy-related baggage. When Hedy Lamarr stepped onto a Hollywood film set, she brought all the mystique of a European star. She took English lessons, refined her accent, and made a splash at lavish parties draped on the arm of playboys like Howard Hughes. She officially joined the golden era of Tinseltown. Then, just when she was about to make her screen debut in the 1938 film Algiers, Europe exploded with conflict. News reached Lamarr that Germany had annexed Austria, placing her mother and others in considerable danger. Fueled by love and worry, she took her earliest paychecks and arranged for her mother's safe passage to the U.S. Soon after, Algiers opened in theaters, and Hedy's first glimpse on screen produced a collective gasp from audiences. Critics said it was the kind of gasp you heard only once in a generation. She was breathtaking. Hollywood had found its new bombshell. Even so, scripts that captured her range didn't exactly come pouring in. She'd get cast in roles that exploited her looks but rarely tested her hidden talents. So in her downtime, she did something that was almost unimaginable for a starlet of that era. She studied science. She fiddled with inventions at home, tinkering with little contraptions. Some turned out to be flops, like a soda tablet that was supposed to transform water into Coca-Cola, but tasted more like Alka-Seltzer. Others, it turned out, changed the course of tech history. During these early days, she also embarked on a short romantic adventure with screenwriter and producer Gene Markey. It was a whirlwind. They decided practically overnight to get married. One reason for the haste was that Hedy wanted to adopt a baby boy, little James, and she wanted him to have a stable father figure, but Markey barely had time to play that role. They both hustled in their careers, saw each other only sporadically, and the relationship quickly frayed. Instead, Hedy devoted her energy to mothering James and took on a new mental challenge. She was horrified by the war. She'd fled Austria, rescued her mother from certain danger, and now she watched children across Europe suffer as the conflict expanded. One day, a passenger ship full of evacuee kids was struck and sunk. 90 of those children died. The tragedy consumed her. She wanted to do more for the Allied cause than just star in propaganda films or pose for patriotic photos. She remembered details of weapons design from her time married to Fritz Mandl. He used to host guests who'd discuss intricacies of torpedo guidance systems. She'd occasionally be at the dinner table, forced to listen. Now that knowledge might come in handy. She approached her friend George Antheil, an avant-garde composer whose flair for the unconventional matched hers perfectly. Together they dreamed up a revolutionary concept called frequency hopping spread spectrum. At the time, Allied torpedoes were vulnerable to jamming by the Axis powers. If the torpedo's guiding signal hopped from one frequency to another in a coded sequence, it would be almost impossible to jam. They refined the idea, patented it, and proudly presented it to the U.S. Navy. Rather than see the potential, the Navy dismissed them. They said essentially thanks, but no thanks. Worse, they also labeled it alien property, making it harder for Hedy and George to do anything with their own invention. So Hedy found a new way to do her part. She participated in war bond drives, traveled the country, and used her star power to raise money for the war effort. Meanwhile, her marriage to Markey disintegrated, leading to a quick divorce. She soon reconnected with British actor John Loder, someone she'd known casually since 1938, but who had been married at the time. Now, though, he was single, and the two became close fast. Loder seemed perfect for the single mother who wanted stability. He was tall, polite, good with her son James, and apparently smitten with Hedy. They married, and for a few years, life resembled something like a classic Hollywood romance. She got pregnant. She had a baby girl named Denise, and Loder adopted little James, officially becoming his father. Yet even that bright spot was overshadowed by another crisis. Hedy was plagued by mysterious pain that a doctor diagnosed as psychosomatic, an echo of the many traumas she'd endured, from her early exploitation in Ecstasy to the oppressive Mandl days. She embarked on 2 years of psychoanalysis, dredging up haunting memories from her youth, a horrifying assault as a teenager, episodes of manipulation, and so many regrets. The therapy gave her clarity, and once again, she craved a fresh start. After her second child's birth, she was ready for another new life. She severed her ties with MGM, divorced John Loder, and simultaneously faced a controversy that would cast a long shadow. Her bond with her eldest child, James, was disintegrating. Some accounts suggest that Hedy, wanting to distance herself from any older entanglements and step fully into a new life, put James in boarding school, rarely visited, and eventually cut him off when he started spending holidays with a teacher and her husband. She viewed that as a betrayal. He was just a boy, but he lost access to the woman who was effectively his mother. This rift never fully healed. Meanwhile, her two younger children, Denise and Tony, remained with her, but even that arrangement grew tumultuous. Hedy was always rushing into a new marriage or starting a new project, rarely staying still long enough to give them anything close to a normal existence. Shortly after these upheavals, the box office success of Samson and Delilah in 1949 catapulted her back to stardom. It was a big, expensive film, co-starring Victor Mature, and it made her once again a top Hollywood draw. But she was drained. The role was demanding, and the swirl of her personal life didn't help. She worked insane hours, occasionally fainting on set from exhaustion, then going home to juggle single parenthood. Whenever she pictured an escape, her mind drifted to the old fantasy. The perfect husband, someone stable and loving. Then, in 1951, she took a trip to Mexico to catch her breath, and that's where she met Teddy Stauffer. He'd been a band leader and was now attempting to build a business with restaurants and hotels in Acapulco. Fascinated by his confident vibe, Hedy felt drawn in. They married. Once again, the cycle repeated itself. He was jealous, suspicious, prone to outbursts. It wasn't long before she walked away. If that sounds like an exhausting pattern, it only gets more surreal. At some point, Hedy embarked on a disturbing affair with a certain actor she later referred to only as Sam in her memoirs. Sam had an even darker streak than some of her previous men. He was rumored to be obsessed, controlling, and violent. The culminating horror? He created a life-size plastic doll molded in Hedy's exact likeness, which he then used in a twisted scenario to humiliate her when she refused his advances. She recounted how he made her watch him be with the doll, refusing to let her leave until he was finished. It was a shocking, vile chapter in a life that had no shortage of chilling experiences. Still, Hedy refused to let that define her. She decided she wanted more control by producing her own film. She found potential financiers, and one of them, W. Howard Lee, piqued her interest in more ways than one. Their film project ultimately fell through, but their romance heated up. They married in 1953, and for 6 years it looked surprisingly steady. She moved with him to Houston, stepping away from acting, presumably for good this time. But behind closed doors, problems grew. Accusations of physical violence flew in both directions when they eventually divorced. The court proceedings were a circus. Hedy claimed that Lee was cheap and abusive. He responded by calling her temperamental and equally violent. They parted ways with bitterness crackling in the air. During the divorce, Hedy faced one of the scariest moments of her life. Her youngest son, Tony, was hit by a car. A neighbor's frantic ringing of her doorbell alerted her to the terrible scene. Tony lying in the street, half conscious. He clung to life in the hospital, and she stayed beside him, praying for his recovery. Miraculously, he survived, but it was a further drain on her. Exhausted, she tried to handle the final phases of her divorce from afar, sending proxies to Texas court. The judge was livid. She fired all her lawyers in one swoop. Then she hired a new lawyer in L.A., a man named Louis J. Boyce, who became her 6th husband. If it sounds like madness, well, That was pretty much Hedy's love life in a nutshell. Marriage number 6 lasted 2 years. Once again, Hedy alleged her husband was abusive and had drained her finances. He said she was difficult and demanding. In the end, the result was the same. She walked out, refusing ever to marry again. She was done with husbands, done with illusions of perfect romance, but that didn't mean she was going to slip quietly into a calm, reclusive existence. Instead, she wrote a scandalous memoir, Ecstasy and Me, in 1966, featuring a chapter that reprinted a psychoanalysis session verbatim. Filled with juicy revelations, it sold well, until Hedy turned around and sued the publisher, claiming she hadn't approved certain invented details that ghostwriter Leo Guild had stuffed into the manuscript. Then another writer sued Hedy, claiming she had plagiarized entire sections of his articles for that same memoir. The controversies left her drained, and she retreated from Hollywood, living primarily in Florida and sometimes venturing out for personal appearances. But all that drama was overshadowed by a bigger, sadder shift in her life. Twice in her later years, she got arrested for shoplifting, charges she denied. The first time in 1966, she had to go to trial with tabloids having a field day. Eventually, she was found not guilty. She said she regretted the entire episode. Then in 1991, it happened again. Whether it was accidental or the result of some bizarre compulsion, it left a blot on her twilight years. Meanwhile, her greatest invention, the frequency-hopping spread spectrum, finally began to find its place in the world. The Navy had resurrected the concept in the early 1960s, albeit without crediting her or George Antheil at first. Later, the world realized that her invention was the basis for Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and secure military communications. Awards started rolling in, belated accolades for the brilliant idea no one initially wanted. By the 1990s, Hedy Lamarr was recognized in scientific circles as a pioneer. People called to offer tributes, but she rarely made public appearances. Even as she was being honored, her personal struggles with aging and plastic surgery multiplied. She underwent multiple procedures to fix perceived flaws, and some of them went badly. That left her deeply self-conscious. The woman once famous for her striking features barely wanted to show her face. She withdrew from nearly everyone, communicating with her children and the rest of the world almost exclusively by telephone. This reclusive stage of life was heartbreaking for fans, who remembered the luminous star from Algiers, Samson and Delilah, and other classics. She did live to see the year 2000, which she'd privately said was a goal of hers. She passed away just 9 days into the new millennium at age 85 in her Florida home. It was a quiet, peaceful end. Her ashes were brought back to Vienna by her son Tony, scattered in the forest she'd once roamed as a child. The final chapter of Hedy Lamarr's life might have ended there, except for the revelations that emerged once she was gone. That's when her oldest adopted son, James, came forward with documents that upended the entire story he'd been told. He'd grown up believing he was adopted at 9 months old. In 2001, he found a copy of his original birth certificate, which plainly stated that Hedy Lamarr was his birth mother. Furthermore, it indicated that John Loder, Hedy's third husband, was his father. This was a bombshell, but it also explained some glaring mysteries. He'd always felt estranged, never fully accepted. Now, a clearer picture emerged. Hedy had had an affair with John Loder in 1938, back when he was still married to his first wife. She got pregnant, gave birth in secret, and concocted an adoption story to preserve her career and their reputations. 9 months after James was born, she publicly claimed she was adopting him, raising him as if that were the truth. Then after her marriage to Loder in the 1940s, he adopted James on paper, though he was already the biological father. The entire arrangement was a masterclass in hush-hush Hollywood illusions. By the time James discovered all this, there was nothing left but confusion and anger. Hedy had left the bulk of her estate, estimated at $3.3 million, to her two younger children, Denise and Tony. James was pointedly excluded. He did sue, claiming that he and Hedy had reconciled in the last decade of her life, but Tony and Denise disagreed, painting a different picture. Ultimately, they reached a settlement of $50,000 for James. Hedy Lamarr wasn't just a star. She was, to borrow her own words, a curious mind who refused to stand still and look stupid. And in an era that often insisted beautiful women do exactly that, she blew the doors wide open, at least for those daring enough to follow in her wake.